My name is Samantha, and I am the older of two daughters. As long as I can remember, I have always been serious and independent. My sister, Daniela, was the complete opposite, the embodiment of life, color, and sound. As we grew up, our house was always full of noise. Daniela's laughter, echoing through the various corners of the apartment, and her joyful exclamations when she discovered a new trend or a fashion trick always blended into a constant background hum. Mom and Dad were crazy about her, always supporting her ideals, admiring her energy, even when that energy began to overflow and affect everything around her. I, on the other hand, preferred silence. I would search for a corner where I could be alone. My nose buried in a book, this was my way of existing. I was content with the peace and predictability that allowed me to enjoy silence and tranquility. Sometimes, it was just hours spent on homework, and sometimes it was activities that required no effort but gave me immense satisfaction. In the family, I always seemed like an alien, absorbed in thoughts and books, rather than fashion and noise. Birthdays and holidays were real challenges for me, especially when Daniela and I opened presents. She, like a whirlwind, tore through the wrapping paper with a squeal, and her face would light up with genuine joy when she received a new smartphone or a trendy cosmetic set. She could spend hours discussing which of her friends was wearing something cooler, who had chosen the best style for the new season, and how quickly each of her friends had gained followers on social media. Daniela was a whirlwind of new trends and endless demands on herself and those around her. Meanwhile, I would sit in the shadow of her vibrant emotions, carefully putting aside the money I received as a gift. My gaze would remain focused, as if I were detached from all the noise. Dad often, with pride in his voice, would ask why I was saving money when other girls were spending it on fashionable things. "Are you saving for something important?" he would ask, though his eyes betrayed confusion. I would answer briefly, "A laptop for studying." My explanation rarely resonated with them, even though I honestly believed that the computers in the library were always occupied, and I needed my own for studying, working with texts, and personal research. Mom and Dad always supported Daniela in her desire to be at the center of attention, to understand the latest trends, and to keep up with every new gadget in the world of technology and fashion. I, however, preferred to stay in the shadows. They didn't understand why I didn't want what other girls my age desired. They didn't understand that I was always drawn to depth rather than superficiality, to books and complex thoughts rather than idle chatter and brands. I would have loved to spend time with those who shared these interests, but unfortunately, in our world, such people were in the minority, and I often found myself alone. Daniela seemed like a sunbeam, blinding those around her with her light and brightness, but sometimes her life was so tumultuous that I couldn't keep up with her and still remained in the shadows. Mom and Dad were with her, always supporting her ambitions, even if those ambitions seemed superficial and naive to me. But to them, she was special, as she was to most people around her. And all I could do was stand in the shadows and watch. The years went by, and despite my seriousness and independence, I increasingly felt that no one had any expectations of me. Daniela was the daughter who attracted attention. Her successes, her vibrancy, her constant desire to be the center of attention, these were all part of a bigger picture that I couldn't fully understand. And despite all our differences, despite the fact that the world around us never saw us as the same, I felt that our lives couldn't be complete without this difference. I thought that perhaps our parents would finally be disappointed by her carelessness, by her inability to find her way in academic life, as those strict plans and expectations would demand. But instead of feeling the slightest disappointment, they simply surrounded her with even more support. "Oh, sweetheart, don't worry," Mom said, stroking her hair as if she were still a small child who needed to be handled carefully, like a fragile toy. "College isn't for everyone," she added with a light smile, as though the issue wasn't college itself, but something much more important. "You have so many other talents," Mom continued, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice, as if she didn't quite believe her own words. Dad nodded and added, as always, a few comforting words. It's true, princess, you'll find your way. I looked at their happy faces and could barely believe that this was really happening. He was right, she would find her way, but it would be nothing like the one I had once hoped for her. College was everything to me. It was the thing I had to overcome to find myself. For Daniela, it was just an unnecessary decoration on a path she walked with ease, not even noticing how that path was becoming too easy, even empty. I bit my tongue and, without saying a word, went to my room. No matter what I achieved, no matter how much I studied or how much effort I put in, Daniela would always be the favorite child. For her, the world was like an open book, its pages always clean, ready for new joys and encounters. My pages, however, were written to the last line, each stroke a result of hard work and reflection. But I couldn't afford to think about family and their views for too long. When I got to college, it became my new beginning. Here, away from home, among people who valued hard work and ambition, I felt like I was in the right place. Here, I didn't have to hide my aspirations, pretend that I wasn't striving for more. In these walls, I could be myself. I poured all my energy into studying, determined to make the most of this opportunity that had finally been given to me. Everything from before, all the doubts and fears, seemed to vanish, and I began moving forward, despite everything that remained behind. However, one day, in my second or third year, I got a call from home. It was Daniela. I immediately recognized her voice, playful, filled with that same lightness she had always had. She didn't ask how I was doing, didn't inquire about my successes or problems. Daniela always knew how to start a conversation in a way that immediately put me in an awkward position, where I wanted to feel important but also didn't want to reveal too much. "Guess what I've decided?" she asked, with a hint of excitement that was even audible through the phone. "I think I want to take beauty courses. Mom and Dad think it's a great idea." There wasn't a trace of doubt or a hint of fear in her voice. She spoke as though it was her million-dollar decision, as if she had truly discovered something important that would now define her future. Beauty, courses, fashion, these words seemed like a new stage in her life, and she couldn't understand why I didn't share the same enthusiasm. I wanted to say something that would show how hard it was for me to hear this news, but my mind immediately started spinning with thoughts of something else. How should I even react to this? Beauty courses. I was so absorbed in my academic world that I couldn't imagine how she could see something like this as her true calling. "Well, that's true," I said, forcing myself to speak in a calm tone, hiding my confusion. "I think you'll find your way. You've always been sure of what you want." Daniela didn't seem to notice that I was trying to conceal my feelings, or maybe she just wasn't interested. She continued in her usual manner. "Yeah, I told you I feel like this is it, like it suits me. Mom and Dad are so supportive, I just love how they're always there for me." Her voice was full of happiness, and I understood that for her, this was an important step. What did it mean to me? I didn't know. But at that moment, I felt like everything I had been striving for seemed somehow wrong. Daniela's words felt like a small blow to everything I considered my life's guiding principle. One day, Mr. Paul, the owner of the company, called me into his office. I nervously entered, expecting to follow the usual corporate procedures, but his face was unusually solemn. "Samantha, you've done an incredible job," he said with a smile that resembled genuine admiration. "We've never had anyone rise so quickly through the ranks," he continued, barely hiding his pride. I held back my excitement and replied, "Thank you, sir, I really enjoy what I do." I beamed with pride, feeling his words lift me up. It was confirmation of my efforts, a sign that I was on the right path, that my long hours of work, my dedication, and my commitment were finally paying off. Mr. Paul seemed to savor the moment, and his eyes sparkled as he said next, "That's why I want to offer you something special. We have a program for our top employees, a chance to buy an apartment at a significant discount." His words sounded like something unbelievable, like a gift that seemed to be meant just for me, the result of many years of hard work. He smiled, and I, barely believing what was happening, replied, "You have no idea how much this means to me." The next few weeks passed in a routine of paperwork, planning, and consultations. I reviewed contracts, signed documents, met with agents, and selected the right option. It felt like participating in a serious game where I couldn't afford to make a mistake. Everything was being decided, and with each day, with every step, I was getting closer to my dream, my own little corner, a place where I no longer had to endure other people's gazes or comparisons with my sister. There would be no loud parties here, just me, with all my thoughts and expectations. When I finally received the keys to my new apartment, emotions overwhelmed me. I stood at the door and felt an invisible force pulsing within me, as if I had just stepped into an entirely new world. A world where there was no trace of the past, no burden of old obligations. Everything was starting from scratch. I was drifting in my own world, where no one dictated the rules and where I didn't have to compete with anyone's expectations. It was the moment when I could finally feel happy. When I could be myself and enjoy what I had. I decided to throw a housewarming party. It was a small gesture to celebrate a moment that felt important to me, despite its simplicity. I didn't have much furniture like some people, but it didn't matter. I bought a few inexpensive plastic tables and chairs. They were practical and comfortable. I arranged everything with love, carefully choosing a place for each chair and each table. Even the disposable tablecloths I spread over the tables matched the decor perfectly. It wasn't anything extraordinary, but it was mine. I was proud of it, and it meant far more to me than any other symbol of success. On the day of the party, I woke up early to make sure everything was ready. I carefully checked every corner of the apartment, walked around the room, making sure everything was in place, every little detail accounted for. It was important to me that no one would feel I was pretending to have it all. This was my personal space, and I wanted it to look exactly as I had imagined it. Guests began to arrive, and despite the modest setting, the atmosphere was warm and homely. I saw genuine joy and support in the eyes of everyone who came. It was more than just a gathering, it was confirmation that I was in the right place, that my efforts, my work, my independence had resonated with people who truly valued me for who I was. I smiled as I accepted congratulations and chatted with everyone who came up to me. But deep down, I felt that this wasn't just a celebration, it was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. A life where I decide how and with whom I want to be, and where every step I take will matter. A wave of pride swept over me. This car was mine, bought with my own money, and every detail, from the shine of the headlights to the smooth sound of the engine, felt like a symbol of everything I had achieved. It wasn't just a purchase, it was a true sign. A sign that, despite all the hardships and doubts, I had managed to create my own life, my own reality. This car was more than just an object, it was a reflection of my perseverance, my ambition, my resilience. I looked at it, and for a moment, it felt like the world was truly open to me, like there was nothing I couldn't achieve. I hadn't planned on telling my family, knowing that this event might not elicit the response I was hoping for. Especially from Danielle, who had always treated material things as something unimportant, and saw hard work and independence more as oddities. But, as it often happens, the news spread quickly. That evening, my phone rang, and a familiar name appeared on the screen. I picked up the receiver, and Danielle's cheerful voice came through the speaker. "I heard you bought a nice car," she said with that confident tone that always gave away her attitude towards everything she considered important. I felt a slight bitterness stir in my chest. I knew she didn't mean it as a compliment, and her words sounded to me like something empty, meaningless. I knew she wouldn't understand what a real achievement this was for me. "You know, you're really doing everything the hard way," she continued, not hiding her sarcasm. "All this work and saving, it's so unnecessary." Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Something cold and heavy rose in my throat. Danielle, with her light approach to life, with her belief that the world was arranged in such a way that you could just ask for what you wanted and it would be given to you. Everything she said, as usual, was superficial, lacking meaning and depth. Her words made my chest tighten, and I could barely contain my irritation. "What do you mean?" I tried to ask calmly, but my voice betrayed my confusion. It was as if I couldn't believe she seriously thought this way. She hesitated for a moment, as if it were obvious and easy to explain, and then said, "Well, obviously, the main goal of a woman is to get married right, find a man who will take care of you and give you everything you need. Why work yourself to death when you could just have him do all of that?" I felt something cold surge through my veins. Danielle didn't just not understand me, she openly despised what I was doing. She didn't even try to understand how important this was to me, why I worked so hard, why I refused to live by her cookie-cutter rules. In her eyes, I was strange, imperfect, because it wasn't enough for me to just find someone who would give me everything I wanted. For a moment, I lost my words. It was so absurd. How could she not understand that for me, this wasn't just about money or some false idea of success? I wasn't striving for recognition, I wasn't seeking prosperity through someone else. I just wanted to prove to myself that I could be someone, that I could achieve what I had dreamed of. But Danielle, her world was so narrow, so impoverished, that I could hardly believe her words. "Danielle, I don't see things that way," I said, with a hint of exhaustion in my voice. "I want to earn what I have. I'm proud of what I've achieved." But she just laughed, her light, tinkling laugh that always accompanied her conversations, as if her words didn't matter, and everything I said was just unnecessary. As if she thought I was still at that stage where I needed someone to explain the obvious to me. Yeah, she said, clearly underestimating how serious I was. I felt her laughter cut into me, as if I was back to being that person who needed to have simple truths explained, while she, with her unwavering certainty in the correctness of her path, saw no meaning in my aspirations. I hung up the phone, and the silence of the room crashed down on me like a heavy weight. Danielle still didn't understand. But despite that, I had no doubt that the path I had chosen was my own. Interference. Every conversation with Mom inevitably followed the same pattern. When her voice began to ooze with fake sweetness, I already knew what would come next. "Samantha, dear," she would start, and there was something in her voice that made me flinch. "You won't believe who Danielle was." I braced myself for another story about her fairy tale life, about how she had been invited to yet another exclusive event, how she had been spotted in fashion magazines, how she mingled with high society, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Every time I heard these little tales, I felt a strange heaviness building up inside me. It was like losing a game, like fighting a battle where you can never win because the rules keep changing, and every time, the situation is stacked against you. Danielle didn't just live in another world, she was a part of it, and I, as always, remained in the shadows, never fitting into these perfect pictures. One day, after an especially exhausting call, I could no longer hold myself back. "Mom, that's great for Danielle," I said, not hiding the disappointment that probably came through in my voice. "But don't you want to know what's going on in my life?" I felt the words tighten in my throat, and my breath became heavy. I needed to say this. I needed someone to finally pay attention to what I was doing, to the fact that I was trying, that I was finding my own way, even though it wasn't as bright as Danielle's. There was a pause. Mom, as always, stayed quietly composed, and then her response came in that same patronizing tone that always irritated me. "Oh, darling, of course, we care," she started. "But you really should take a leaf out of your sister's book. Be more glamorous. Why work so hard for so little when you could have it all in a few weeks?" Those words felt like a knife to the heart. They came so easily to her, as if she didn't understand that for me, working wasn't just a way to make a living, but a way to find meaning, to feel alive. It was more than just work. And yet, in her world, something entirely different was valued: external symbols of success, flashiness, accessibility, quick wins. In her world, there was no room for those who built their future slowly, step by step. I felt a bitterness rise in my chest. Mom had always said she couldn't be proud of me unless I was more like Danielle. She always expected me to strive for the same things: a glamorous life, successful connections, luxurious events. But I had never understood why I should want that. I wanted to achieve something real, not build my life on other people's opinions and empty chatter. Before I could finish my thought, Mom quickly changed the subject. By the way, Danielle and Nicholas are hosting a housewarming party in their new luxury apartment, she said, as though she had already forgotten our conversation. Those words sounded like a completed thought, like something obvious, like a natural part of their life. I felt my irritation grow inside me. Why couldn't I be part of these conversations? Why did my path always seem smaller, less important? Why were my efforts always overlooked, while the bright and fleeting successes of Danielle took center stage? But I didn't allow myself to show any resentment. I held back. That evening became yet another reminder of how different my sister and I were, how inevitably different our lives had become. I understood that Danielle, despite her lightness and carefree nature, was also striving for her own happiness, but she couldn't see the point in working as hard as I did. In her world, it was possible to live without working, simply existing. In mine, it was necessary to overcome, to fight, and every achievement was proof that I wouldn't give up. I hung up the phone, and her words echoed in my head: "Why work so hard when you can have everything?" And I felt so hurt. So hurt that she couldn't see the value in what I was building. So hurt that her world remained closed to me, while mine was always in plain sight but unnoticed. Then, on an ordinary Saturday, everything changed. Mom called me, and her voice sounded different from usual, trembling and filled with anxiety. "Samantha," she said, and I felt her words strike my chest, "it's Danielle, she's back. Nicholas left her. He said she's too superficial, too focused on spending his money. He called her stupid." I froze, unable to respond immediately. Mom continued, her voice quivering with emotion. "Can you believe it? And she signed a PR deal. She has nothing." A wave of emotions hit me at that moment. Shock, worry, and, honestly, a tiny glimpse of justification. My sister, always so confident in her looks and status, always believing that her appearance and ability to please the world were enough to get everything she wanted, was now standing before me completely different, broken, lost, vulnerable. I quickly pushed that feeling aside. Pretending, that was what irritated me the most. I had always known that her life couldn't be as carefree as it seemed, that her happy, carefree world would eventually collapse. But seeing it with my own eyes was something entirely different. "I'll come," I said, almost without thinking. Grabbing my keys, I felt myself being pulled somewhere, but I couldn't understand what I was expecting from this meeting. When I arrived at my parents' house, it felt like I had entered a war zone. Noise, shouting, frantic conversations. I heard Danielle screaming from the driveway, her voice full of panic and desperation. Inside the house, there was utter chaos. Danielle stood at the door, her face streaked with mascara that had run down her cheeks, and her hair was messy, unlike her usual flawless appearance. She seemed to have lost all confidence, and instead of the usual grace, I saw only raw vulnerability. Mom stood nearby, trying to calm her down, but even her words couldn't comfort her. "Danielle, darling, everything will be okay," she said, but Mom's voice was trembling. She looked at her sister with some kind of pity, but I knew her words were just a mask hiding her fear. We all, probably, feared that this wasn't just a temporary storm but something much deeper and more destructive. I took a step forward, and as soon as I entered the house, a wave of anxiety washed over me. The scene I saw reminded me of something from a movie: scattered fragments, the outlines of a shattered ideal life. Papers were strewn across the table here and there, and on the floor lay a broken vase, which Mom must have bought on sale at some boutique. Everything around seemed turned upside down, as if even the space in the house didn't know how to react to what had happened. "Mom," I said, moving closer and embracing her. Her hands were cold, but I could feel a tremor in them, one that seemed to pass to me. She couldn't say a word, only held onto my hand and gazed at Danielle in despair. My sister stood in front of the mirror in the hallway, trying to pull herself together, but it was clear she couldn't manage. She had no strength left to hold back the storm, and she was mindlessly applying mascara, trying to regain some semblance of the composure she had lost. I had received news that shook me to my core. At the moment when I was expecting a little peace and confidence, I found myself rushing to deal with company matters, arguing over a prize that, according to my calculations, should have been an important step in my career. Everything seemed too complicated, overloaded with details, but at a moment of weakness, when the anxiety broke free, I decided to call my parents. Maybe this news, good, lucky, unexpected, would help heal at least a little of the deep rift I felt between us. "Mom, Dad, you won't believe it, I want to take a round-the-world trip," I said, trying to sound confident. I hoped this news would be seen as a sign that my life was moving forward, that I had finally found something bigger than just a career and routine duties. I dreamed that my parents would be proud of me, that this news would mean something significant for all of us. But the silence that followed my words was deafening. Not the response I had hoped for. Then my mother's cold voice broke through. "Samantha, how can you be so selfish? Your sister is going through terrible times, and you're bragging about your vacation?" Her words sliced through me like a blade, hitting some vulnerable spot. I felt a chill sweep over me, and a lump tightened in my throat. It was more than just a reproach. It felt like a punishment for daring to think about myself. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was so unfair. I felt bitterness and disappointment wash over me. Danielle was once again becoming the center of the universe, and I, despite all my accomplishments, was left on the sidelines. "I'm not bragging," I said quietly, almost whispering, as if afraid that every word I spoke would be taken as further proof of my heartlessness. "I just thought that." I didn't finish, as Mom interrupted me. "If you had the slightest bit of decency, you would give that ticket to Danielle," she said sharply, like a verdict. As if I were obligated to give it up, to forego my dream for someone else. Danielle, who hadn't even asked for it, Danielle, who always got everything she wanted. She continued, and in her voice, I could hear not just resentment, but something I couldn't quite understand. "She needs a change of scenery. You can stay home and work, as if you're always doing something." These last words struck me like thorns sinking into my skin. At that moment, something painfully familiar clicked inside me: years of disappointment, years of invisible struggles, unspoken words and actions, all spilled out in an instant. I felt my entire resolve, all my determination, all my pride in what I had accomplished in my life, merge into a single surge of rage and pain. I could no longer hold it in. No, I was firmly resolved, would not continue being the person who constantly gives in, who hides her own life for the sake of someone else's ambitions. I felt my fingers clench into fists, my whole body tense. "No," I said, but with a finality in my voice. "I will not give this ticket to Danielle. I earned it myself. I will live my life the way I want." Those words felt like a revelation, as if I was speaking for the first time what had been buried deep inside me for so long. I called my parents, and Mom picked up the phone immediately. Her voice was too cheerful, as if she were trying to hide some important emotion. "Samantha, darling, how was your trip? Where are my cars?" she asked in a tone that could have betrayed her true intentions. But I stopped myself sharply. I had no strength to answer her as she expected, and I felt everything inside me tighten. A few seconds of silence, and finally, Dad came on the line. "We sold it," he said, almost casually, with no regret, no sign of concern in his voice. "The world seems to have swept you up, that Danielle needs cheering up." I felt the anger rise in waves, and at that moment, it seemed as if the whole world was collapsing, as if I were a helpless witness to how my boundaries were being blurred. Mom continued, carelessly, as though nothing was wrong. "We spent the money to take her shopping and to the spa." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What they had just told me seemed unreal, like something that could never have been imagined in my worst nightmare. That was my car. My own car, the one I had bought with my own hard-earned money, and now it was simply sold to satisfy someone else's whims. And how could they have done this without asking me? I screamed, my voice choking with frustration, "You have no right." But they didn't hear me. Or maybe they didn't want to hear me. My father's voice cut off, now flat and dismissive. "Samantha, we are family, what's yours is ours. Don't be selfish." That word struck me like lightning. Right in the heart. Selfish. I was selfish because I couldn't just let go of everything I had built over the years, because at some point, I wanted something that was mine, something I hadn't demanded or asked for, I just wanted it. Something inside me snapped. Years of disappointment, resentment, and anger that had built up in my soul poured out like a torn wound that finally couldn't hold anymore. I couldn't stay silent, I had to say what I felt. Selfish? You stole my car. You invaded my home. The words came out uncontrollably. And I'm selfish? I want my money back. My hands clenched into fists, and I felt the adrenaline surge through my veins, the anger spreading through my whole body. Now their reaction was immediate and harsh. On the other end of the line, I heard their cold outrage. They called me heartless, accused me of not understanding the importance of supporting family, of being there in tough times. They said I was acting like a stranger. That money and property don't matter when there are crises in the family. And I heard that same old tune again about how everything is for the family, how we do everything together. But I could no longer listen to it. I wasn't ready to lose this battle. Everything inside me rebelled against giving up, against surrendering. But at that moment, I realized I had lost everything I could lose to keep their love. All that was left was me, and I was no longer going to make excuses for their actions. I wasn't going to be the one who always gives in to keep them happy. With every word, they tore me apart more. And at some point, when their voices became unbearably loud and full of contempt, I hung up the phone. The silence that followed was heavy. It held no relief, no peace. It was something completely different. From that moment on, I knew I could never get back what had been lost. And perhaps I wouldn't even want to. I stood in the room, gripping the phone, trying to cope with the wave of anger and despair that had overwhelmed me. Their words continued to echo in my mind, reverberating through every corner of my consciousness. "We're family," my father had said, "what's yours is ours. Don't be selfish." That was the final straw. I could no longer be the Samantha who just endured, who agreed because it was how it had to be. This situation, this game of submission, seemed absurd and cruel. I had put so much effort into achieving what I had, and now my accomplishments were dissolving in their words like smoke. All my pride in my own work burned up like a paper boat under the scorching sun. "What do you want?" my father asked again, this time his voice full of weary irritation. "Do you want your car back? Or do you just want to make a scene?" My mother added, with barely concealed sarcasm, "You could be more grateful, Samantha. Everything we do it for you. For you, because we love you." I felt how the rising anger gave way to emptiness, and something inside me suddenly became cold and silent. I stopped shouting, stopped arguing. There was nothing left but the abyss, into which I could just fall. I was silent. silent because I no longer knew what to say. I tried to calm the storm, but it wouldn't calm down. At that moment, everything seemed pointless. No matter what I did, no matter how I acted, I couldn't change what was happening anymore. And then, after a long silence, I said, "I don't need anything from you. I won't ask for permission to live my life anymore. And I won't try to be part of this game." I felt how my words, though quiet, seemed to fall on them like stones, shattering the illusion of their perfect world. My father didn't answer. Neither did my mother. They didn't understand, didn't hear. They remained in their world, where money and status meant more than anything else. But at that moment, I realized their world was no longer mine. And maybe it never had been. I hung up the phone, but the feeling that this wasn't just an argument, but the beginning of something much more important, stayed with me. Perhaps I was ready for changes I hadn't even thought about before. Perhaps I was just beginning to realize that true freedom is not a place you can go or something you can buy. Freedom is something far more complex. It's something that can't be taken from you unless you allow yourself to lose it. I walked to the window, not knowing what to expect from the next day. But I knew one thing: I wouldn't go back to what I had been. Everything around me suddenly felt unreliable, unstable, but it wasn't frightening. It was liberation. And suddenly, I noticed someone walking down below, on the street. A stranger. He stopped near my house, glanced at the window where I stood, and something in his gaze made me feel that something important was hidden behind him. Something I didn't yet know, but something that was bound to crash into my life. And I couldn't understand why that gaze, full of silent confidence, made me feel that everything was just beginning. That ahead of me were events in which I would no longer be merely an observer. I took a step back and looked again at the horizon. There was emptiness in my life again. But now it didn't scare me. It promised change. That stranger, like so many other things, could be part of the future, or just a fleeting shadow. And perhaps the answer to all this I would never get.